Hello everybody, this is about using Python and Flask together, so using your own Python scripts inside a Flask app. Now Flask is basically a way to run a web page or a series of web pages with Python. You don't need to use Apache or Nginx or anything else, you can just run it natively in Python. And this is not going to be a tutorial about Flask. This is just going to be me freestyling. So it's not going to be very structured, but hopefully you'll be able to see me break stuff, fix stuff, modify stuff, and just get a general feel for how it all fits together. So without further ado, let me just demonstrate it. App. So my main Flask. Here we go. Warning, this is a development server. Do not use it in production and deployment. Use a production WSGI instead. 127001, port 5000, so it's all the defaults. And here we go. So this is what I've kind of cobbled together. Carefully written, I mean. So Flask with authentication, there's many ways of doing it. This is probably the most basic. This is using a SQLite database to store the user login. So I've already created a login, so I'll show you that working. So that's autofill as well. So it's just putting my username and then my password. My browser's obviously stored that. So if I log in, we arrive at this page. So this is kind of my development work in progress page. I'm just going to make that a bit smaller because otherwise I'm blocking it. This is intended as an example of how you might go about creating a program to specify some interfaces for an imaginary device with a default gateway, an IP address, and a subnet mask. For instance, you might be creating your own version of IPAM to store some IP addresses. And so let's just put in some basic details. How you can set up authentication for user login, registration, and then how you can pass variables between a Flask app and your Python code. And there we see number of cards, IP address, subnet mask, and this here from function. So in a minute we'll look at that. Before we do that, I'll just give you an overview of the general structure of the code. So many files. So we've got static, which is the CSS, which makes it look pretty. You don't have to have that. If you didn't, it would just be like writing on a white background. Templates, these are all the HTML files, which obviously contain all of the forms and all of the things that the user interacts with as normal. App, which is this file which you see here with a huge number of Flask imports, but they all go to make your life easier because they handle the form, the registration, input, validation, bcrypt, which encrypts the password, well, hashes it, so it's one-way hash. SQL Alchemy, Flask login. I'm kind of showing these. I'm not going to run through how to build this from scratch. If you want the code, I'll put it on GitHub. This is more a demonstration of how it works, and in a second I will just break some variables and fix some variables and show you how they follow through from the front end through to a function through to what I've actually called page 2. So page 2 is where, if you're familiar with Ginger, the Ginger syntax is basically printing out the variables that have been passed from the user input screen, which is called dashboard. So let's kind of rewind a bit and start from the beginning. So Python uses Flask. Flask is a lightweight framework for making websites that can run in Python via Python. App equals Flask name, all the usual. These 3 lines are for the database side of things. So SQLite and the first time you run it, it will create a database.db. Unlike more complex databases, this SQLite will actually generate, which you can see there. It will generate that when it first runs. So we've got a front end, we've got a database, and then we've also got some Python functions, or a Python function, which I've written inside fu.py. And all this is just called big meh, and it's just returning some text. Obviously, we can expand on that in the future and just, add in whatever functions we want, really. We could just have 10, 20 functions inside this file, and all I'm doing is importing that on line 15 here. So in my main app file, so if you're familiar with Flask, app is typically your main file. You run it. So you can run it from this file. So if name equals main, then app.run debug equals true. Many, many options there. You can change the default port. Host, port, debug, a load.env there as well. See real world examples from GitHub. As soon as I move my mouse to click on it, oh yeah, it's a bit it's a bit nervous. Real world examples of Flask run. The IntelliSense is quite good if you just want to go straight to see some examples of how someone else has implemented it. Host, port, so quite a common thing to change the default port. Too many command line arguments if somebody passes any more. I'm not really sure what. I don't know if that's entirely necessary, but anyway, that's I've digressed. Let's go back to the top. So we've done a load of imports. Flask Alchemy. So SQL Alchemy handles the database, the ORM object relational model. The Flask login bit is going to handle all of the login. Flask WTF. Flask form. So it handles the form data. So those 3 lines. bcrypt does the encryption, and that's my custom function there. So then we've got the database bits and pieces here. Again, I'll put the code on GitHub so you can copy this. I'm not saying this is the correct way to do it, but it works. So it's a good starting point, and I'm going to add and break a few things shortly. So if you're getting bored, keep watching. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe because of the YouTube algorithms and all that stuff. So I'm creating some classes: user class, register form class. I've pretty much just taken this from something I found on the internet and got it working. So this is definitely not a tutorial on how to create a login. This is more a demo of how I've got it to work. And also the main thing here will also be how to kind of run it, link it all together, and where the various components all fit together. So this is probably one of the most interesting bits. This is page 2. So this is the results page, and what it does is it's originally I was calling the function that I should probably change that function. Actually, that can go. As can that. So if the request equals post, so if something's been posted from the home page or the dashboard page, form get page 2, number of cards, which is my variable, IP and mask. So these are the names of the 3 variables which will be getting passed into page 2. So if you see 128, 130, 131, those 3 variables will end up inside the double curly braces on page 2. There. So see these three? So these three here, in fact, let me just move that out of the way. Split right. And there we go. So number of cards on 128 in the main form will end up being passed to page 2. So page 2 really is just displaying the information, but these variables could also be the variables here could be passed to a function, and then the function would then pass its output into page 2, which, if you look here, I've created a variable called A, a variable called B, and then C equals A plus B. And then meh equals C. So meh is kind of the placeholder, and that is equal to C, which equals 5, obviously. What else? Greeting. Okay, so I removed that. Let me put that back in. So I've shown here where you just pass in. So C is the result of 2 plus 3, which is 5. So meh equals 5, and then meh is the variable there. So in our output, we will see 5 on the screen in the H2 tag. Let's this is more interesting potentially. So greeting, again, a variable name equals big meh, and big meh is a function which runs inside foo.py. So all the big meh function is doing is returning hello mofo. So let's move that back across. Let's copy that. And all we need to do is put the variable name. Let's put from function fu.py. Number of cards equals number of cards IP. So these 3 variables are what's collected from the form. And in the form, which is the dashboard form, which is basically the form with all the input boxes, then I've got these here which are collecting. So label for FOR equals IP, input type equals text. Ultimately I need to validate those as IP addresses, so yeah, that's another job. ID equals IP, name equals IP. So as long as that name then gets passed into here with request.form.get, so IP follows through to here, which is then, so this here doesn't need to match that. I could call this IP underscore address, and then as long as I call it underscore address on the right hand side here, should all still work. So let's just cancel that and start it again from scratch, just to show there's no camera trickery going on. Here we go, login. I'll show you the login in a second as well to register. What did I just change? I changed the IP address, didn't I? And yeah, obviously, well, not obviously, but there you can see it's still working. So then, and again, so that's on the right hand side is the variable that I've set from the original dashboard form. And again here I could call this IPX, and then this is what's going to the template. So as long as I set this in my page 2 as IPX, then let's go. Yeah, so it's still working. And the reason it's still working is because the placeholder variable in the ginger type pair of curly braces, or double curly braces. So ginger syntax is kind of the two curly braces either side of your variable. And yeah, so I'm not going to call it IPX because IPX actually means something else in network language. But really, you may as well just keep your variables the same and your placeholder names the same. So really, these are, I would call these placeholder names, and then you've got your variables on the right hand side. Yeah, so the login I've had to create or use the code for form method post action login C. If we show you, go to references. Login author. Let's run it. Probably better thing to be doing. As I say, I actually I copied the code and got it to work. So again, as I say, this is not this is definitely not a tutorial on how to set up Flask login. More demo on how it works. And yeah, okay, let's register them. So register page. YouTubings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The problem with this though is that anybody could register. So it's not really what you would do if you were using it. Maybe you could turn on the registration, let all your users register, and then turn off the registration form, I guess. So here we go, and now we are logged in. It doesn't, I should change that actually to say who you're logged in as. Press here to log out. So I've got, there we go, we've got 2 users now. Yeah, so if you're wondering about the CSS, it looks familiar. I've adapted the CSS from W3 Schools. I really like it. I think it's just so, well, neat and minimalist. And it just always works, and it's not got any crazy, I don't know. It's probably, let's have a look at it. CSS. So it is responsive, so it's just set up, so it would resize for a mobile device. Yeah, width 100. Width 25%. Clear floats after the columns. I'm no expert at CSS, absolutely not. So yeah, I just think it's quite simple and easy, well, relatively easy to adjust. Right, hopefully this is giving you an idea of how you can set up Flask with. So the other thing is, if you're fairly new to Flask, everything needs a root. Important, you need to make sure that your roots don't contradict each other. So if you start having extended paths, you don't want, let me just find it for you. Flask roots overlap. Create multiple roots. You can get in a muddle with the roots if you have one that's less specific above one that's more specific. We'll just have a look at this and then I'll round up the video. Here we go. Try create the static root pattern before the dynamic one. Yeah, so when you've got dynamic roots with variables in them, you don't. So the static root needs to come first. Again, Flask is still kind of relatively new to me. I'm not, and I don't intend to really become a full core, hardcore Flask expert anytime soon. But I think the important takeaway from this video is that you can simply pass variables to another form using the Ginger syntax, the double curly braces, and you can run your own function. So greeting, which is what is going to appear on page 2, there. And greeting equals big meh, which is my own function, which I've imported here. And then that lives inside a file called fu and is doing that. So let's add another function. So def demo 1, and let's just say a equals 99, b equals 9, c equals a minus b, return c, and then demo 1. We need to import our second function, so we'll put import in demo 1 there, so that's important. So line 15, and let's come back down here, and demo equals demo 1. Let's make it more meaningful. So demo answer equals demo 1. And then we're just going to page 2. And we just need to add, let's add this here. What did I call it? Demo answer. So demo answer from there goes into page 2. And there, and let's just say demo answer equals, okay, good. And then if we run this, or run app.py rather. I didn't put a comma, sorry. I'll run again. Login. Again, you can see why why testing is automated. It's just painful, isn't it? Testing stuff manually. There we go. Demo answer equals 90. From function fu.py. So that's from. If we just let me pull that across there. I think I can make that always on top. And then you see, so hello mofo in my function there ends up here. And 99 minus 9 equals 90, return, so C is equal to 90, which I'm returning from demo 1, and that's where the 90 appears. And obviously you can do way more complicated things. You could, for instance, maybe machine learning, you could use a model, pass it some input from your first page. So this page, you could pass in your variables, run, I don't know, logistic regression, linear regression model, for instance, and submit, which would then run one of these functions from your root, and it would return something, and then the return value you can put into page 2. You'd have a variable here, which would be the result of the machine learning model. And then you just plonk it into page 2, which would be your answer. So yeah, you just put your answer like I've done there, and then your answer would be here. So say for instance you were doing machine learning model to using linear regression to calculate house prices based on number of bedrooms and postcode and so on. You'd put a number of bedrooms, postcode, you'd click submit. It would call the Python function, which would run the model. And then, yeah, get your answer on here. So this is similar to what I did with, what I did do something similar to this. I'll put the link in the description with an NLTK model. And I also had a video on Thinkster which did something similar. That was when I had my 3-month trial of Google GCP. Okay, so that'll probably do for today. So in the meantime, please could you subscribe, thumbs up, comment and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching. See you again.